One of my favorite little phrases that we find in some of our issue pamphlets here at Celebrate Recovery is this phrase that we learn to move from hurting to healing to helping. That's the goal of the process of recovery. But what's involved in that?
Recovery can be hard, but it's worth it. There is hope knowing we can find healing one step at a time with Jesus and healthy community. Whether you're struggling with a hurt or a hang-up or a habit, you're not alone. During this podcast, we share real stories, practical tools, and powerful truths that inspire you to keep moving forward. No matter where you are on your journey, there's hope ahead. So stick with us as we walk this path together through Celebrate Recovery.
Well, hey, y'all, welcome back to Hope in Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast where we talk life change stories and have recovery conversations to help keep us moving forward in our journey of healing and hope as we walk in deeper surrender with Jesus and more authentic community with one another. I'm super glad to be here with you today. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with depression, food issues, grief, and sexual addiction. My name's Andy, and I've got the great privilege of being a part of our staff team for Celebrate Recovery here at Fellowship Bible Church of Northwest Arkansas. And I just want to say, if you're stumbling across this for the first time, we're really glad that you're here. Over the course of life, all of us pick up various hurts and hang-ups and even some habits that we don't like. And sometimes we can feel like we get bogged down with those things. And so if you're having a rough week, rough day, rough season, we want you to know you're not alone and you're in the right place. And for whoever's listening, wherever you're listening, if you wouldn't mind dropping a like or a comment or a rating, it just helps to expand the reach of what we're talking about here so that other people can find the same hope that we're in the process of finding too. I mentioned just a second ago that in our issue pamphlets on Friday night, there's this little phrase. Those issue pamphlets, if you're unfamiliar, they kind of trace out different recovery topics and they give a problem and like a description of the problem, but also a description of the solution. And I know in several of them, part of the solution, it says that we learn to move from hurting to healing to helping. And as I was thinking about that little phrase, I think that is such a cool, easy to remember description of what this recovery process is about, at least some really key aspects of it. And I want to talk about kind of what that process entails a little bit today. Because I know one of the things that I hear from time to time, and I think it's a pretty good question, is like, man, why do we need to engage in this process? What's the value? Why do we dig into our story and our hurts? And why can't we just buckle down, get it together, and move on? And that's a fair question. I know I asked that question a lot in my life before I got into this recovery process. It was me living with this idea of like, I need to be able to get past this. The problem is that as we go throughout life, sometimes it's not as simple as just getting past whatever this thing is, whether it's a hurt that we've carried for our entire life, whether there's some hang-ups, some faulty core beliefs that we're buying into about ourselves, God, others, our relationships, or maybe there's some habits that are starting to wreak a little bit of chaos in our life. And it's not always as simple as, let's just get through this. I think for a long time in my life, I assumed that freedom was just being able to stop it. If I can just fix what's going on, then I'm going to be fine. The problem that I found, and maybe you can relate to this too, is that I thought that I just needed to have all of the answers and just to fix it and move on. But If I had all of the answers, then I would have fixed the problem, but I didn't and I don't. So I never did fix it on my own. And so this process of recovery is designed to help us move out of the stuckness in our life and to help provide the tools and the space for us to lean into the healing that Jesus promises us. I'm reminded that Jesus in the Gospels said that I came to give life and to give it to the full. He came to bring life so that we could live in an abundance of life. And I know a long time I felt like I wasn't living an abundant life as I was kind of held back by my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. I'm also reminded, it's a pretty familiar passage, but Hebrews 12, the first couple of verses in there, it says somewhere along the lines of, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run this race with perseverance, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And I think a lot of times we just want to just run the race, but we find it really hard to cast off the things holding us back. And so I love that little phrase, we move from hurting to healing to helping. And I think one of the key operative words in that is that we move. Recovery is designed to produce some movement in our lives. I stayed stuck in my pornography addiction for 13 years, trying to fix it by myself under my own strength. And it left me in a place where I felt like I was bleeding out and I couldn't do anything. A lot of the fear that I had of like trying to bring awareness to my own heart is that I'm just going to understand my emotions and it's going to freeze me and it's going to keep me stuck there. And there is a possibility that there's times when we start to dig into some of the hurts that are going on in our life that it can be overwhelming and we can find ourselves in a space where we feel like we get bogged down and we get stuck in that. But the reality is that, and it's kind of funny, the fear is that if I become aware of this, then I'm going to get stuck in it. When so many of us are living in a stuck place already. And so we don't enter into the process to get stuck in it. We actually enter into the process so that we can move through the process. And so we move from hurting. What do we mean by that? Well, the reality is that there are so many different hurts that have accumulated over our life that bog us down. We don't typically do a great job acknowledging the hurts that are going on in our lives. And, there may be some of us listening to this right now, and you might be thinking, I'm not hurting. I don't feel like I'm hurting at all. I feel fine. And you may genuinely feel that way. But here's the thing that I have seen so true in my life and in the life of so many others, is that if we ask ourselves the question, hey, are there some behaviors in my life that are causing chaos? And like whether it is some sort of secret struggle, whether it is some consistent stuckness that we see going on in our relationships, whether there are some patterns of behavior that are kind of becoming roadblocks to us kind of following God and connecting with others well. If there's some of those things that are going on, if there's some habits and some relational fallout that's happening, those things don't just happen in a vacuum. Like, I would have never said when I was in the midst of my pornography addiction that I was somebody that wrestled with a lot of pain in my life. I wouldn't have said, man, I am bleeding out in my pornography addiction. Actually, it probably would have sounded a whole lot more like, yeah, I'm using porn and I feel like I'm trying to stop and I'm having a tough time with it, but like I'm okay. I just don't know why I can't stop doing this. And if you resonate with that and there's something like that in your life, let me pose a question. Could it be the case that it's not that you're not hurting, but maybe you are trying to cover up your hurt with something? Oftentimes, growing up, and I remember Rodney Holmstrom, who's a part of our Celebrate Recovery Ministries, mentor of mine and my boss, good friend, he said recently in a talk that sometimes when there's emotions that come up in our life, emotions that weren't safe for us to express, we end up kind of suppressing, and we ended up transferring that to either emotions that were acceptable in our families of origin, or we transfer them to something physical. And that might sound a little confusing, but let me tell you what it looked like in my story, is that growing up, for one reason or another, I didn't necessarily feel safe expressing sadness to a large degree. Not that I wasn't somebody who deeply felt emotions, which, by the way, all of us have an emotional life. It's just whether or not we're aware of it or not. All of us have an emotional life. And for me, there were feelings of sadness and in particular feelings of anger. Anger was not something that was super welcome in our home growing up and wasn't super well tolerated in our home growing up. And that wasn't entirely a bad thing necessarily, but it had some cost to it. The way that it impacted me is that I didn't feel safe expressing anger beyond just low-level frustration. And my anger, since it wasn't expressed, I ended up stuffing it. And I expressed it in emotions that were more acceptable in my family of origin, in particular, really sarcastic humor. And so there was a lot of biting sarcasm in my life that came out that was being fueled by anger that was stuffed. But more importantly, that anger found an outlet in my behavior, primarily in my pornography addiction. That I ran to something to soothe and calm that anger. And so I bring all of that up because, like, all of us have hurts in this life. If you have figured out a way of getting through life without feeling pain, please let me know. Drop us a line. We'd love to hear how you've done that. But the reality is that all of us experience hurt in this life. And typically we don't do a good job addressing the hurt when it happens. This reference is starting to get a little outdated, and I know we've shared it before, but it's appropriate. If you've seen a John Wayne movie, John Wayne, old Western star from the 50s and 60s, one of the things that always happened in John Wayne movies is that he was always fighting the bad guys, and it always ended up being some Native American Indians that were, something was going on. And so he's shooting at them, and he's getting arrows flung at him, and inevitably John Wayne gets shot in the arm with an arrow. And what John Wayne did, because he was just this manly, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of, stereotypical character, he didn't stop and go, oh my gosh, I just got shot. Billy, can you keep shooting? Does anybody have like some Neosporin? Can we fix this? No, he grabbed the arrow shaft and he broke it off and he kept fighting. And he'd always get shot 3 or 4 more times in there, and he'd look like a pincushion by the end of it. But the next scene was him, and he had one just like, homemade sling on his arm, and he was there with the heroin, and the credits would roll. And what we never see is did they ever actually go and pull the arrowheads out that were under the surface? For many of us, because we've learned ways to survive in life, we learn how to break the shaft off of the arrow, but we typically don't do a good job of going back and actually pulling the arrowhead out or pulling all of the arrowhead out. And so we end up walking around life with these half-healed wounds. And then sometimes there are situations or personalities or circumstances that happen that bump up against those places of woundedness in our life. And we see this sensitivity come up, this rawness come up that feels weird. And it may come up in overreactions. It may come up in ways that we cope and run to certain things. And we might realize that we're running to alcohol without even understanding why. But it's driven by a wound. It's important to understand that when we come into the recovery process, there inevitably is always some wounds that are under the surface. And so we seek to understand and become aware of where we're at. We become aware of the fact that there are issues and behaviors and relational fallout going on in our life, and that on our own strength, we don't have the ability to deal with it. And so we seek to address the underlying hurts that are driving us while holding us in the place of becoming aware of what's happening. And then we move into healing. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that healing looks like when we come back from our break.
Hey friends! A lot of people find the process of starting recovery scary because they aren't sure how to begin or what to expect. The easiest way to get started is simply to get started. Just take that next right step and go to a CR meeting. Every Friday night, we have our Celebrate Recovery meetings at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers. At 6 p.m., we have a great meal for connection with other recovery brothers and sisters. Then we meet for large group at 7 p.m., followed by open share groups at 8. Same schedule on both campuses, different teachers, different worship teams, but the same great experience. We'd love for you to join us this Friday night. It's never too late to start or start over again. For more information, go to fellowshipcr.org.
And we're back talking about what does it look like to move from hurting to healing to helping. The next part is moving into healing. And this is a really important part of it. What do we mean by healing? What are the different aspects of healing? And there's a lot to talk about, and we're not going to cover it all right now, but I think a couple of them for me. The first part of healing is awareness. Am I becoming awake and alive to what's going on? Awareness is so important because just like what we were talking about before the break, so many of us are walking around with arrowheads under our skin and we don't even realize it. And so what recovery does, what the process does as we engage in open share groups, as we jump into a step study, as we hear stories of life change, we hear other people reflect on their story and we start to draw dots to our story. We start to understand, oh, that person shared about how this thing triggered them to want to act out. That's actually a part of my process too of acting out. Or, oh, this person shared their life change story and they talked about their family dynamic. I had a hard family dynamic and upbringing too. Or we dig into the step study material and we go, oh, yeah, this is the family secret that, yeah, I've always known it's there, but I've never actually looked at it and organized it. And so awareness helps us to start slowing down and starting to look objectively at what's going on. Before recovery, one of the things, I remember talking with my wife about this one day, is I feel like I lived so much of my life on autopilot. And I felt like life was just happening to me rather than me happening to life. And awareness, as we develop awareness, we do so by slowing down, hearing others, and starting to get some self-reflection and asking, hey, is this stuff the same for me too? And then we also start to become honest about the things that are going on in our life. And, like for me, for my pornography addiction, one of those things of awareness was also just this honest look and evaluation of what my behavior was doing. I had to come to the point where I said, you know what? Where I'm at is not where I want to stay. This is not helping me live the life that I know God made me for. And some of those things in awareness are really painful. And it's hard to go to those places because whenever we enter in recovery, we're not looking for more pain. Nobody's looking for more pain anytime. We're looking for relief. But here's the thing. God never brings relief without bringing awareness first. He's so faithful to do that for us because it helps us to actually see where we're at. And so the first part of the healing process, it's awareness. It's understanding where we're at. And then as we understand where we're at, we start to organize those things. Rather than it seeming like our life is just one giant closet that just has things strewn all over the place, we start to pick up the little pieces and start to connect the dots and organize what happened. We start to, for me, I started realizing it makes sense how I got to be a pornography addict. I did get re-exposed when I was 12. But even more than that, why was it so appealing to me? Oh, I actually first got exposed to pornography when I was 8 years old. And, these were some of the other conversations I had and experiences. We start to organize those parts of our story. And again, some of those realizations can be hard, but they start to bring clarity. In our dysfunction, there's been a fog that has settled over our story. And in recovery, we start to organize things and bring understanding so that fog starts to lift. And so we have awareness and then organization. We start to live in community and vulnerability with each other. We start to bring other people into our hurts. We start to find support and people to walk alongside us. And we start to get radically gut level honest with those people because we recognize that whenever we're trying to hide or downplay or deflect from our stuff, that's never a recipe for us starting to move forward from them. Healing also involves us understanding our heart, and I'll say this, developing some resilience. And so what do I mean by developing some resilience? One of the evidences that we are finding healing is that the things that used to sting really badly, or the triggers that used to trigger us really, really badly, seem to have their effect dulling in our life. And so for example, let's say with triggers out in the world, things that we see or experience that start getting us on the mindset of wanting to go act out in our habit. As we work our recovery, as we become aware of those things, as we bring others into those things, as we also start to develop tools to catch ourselves in the moment when we're being triggered, the more we have healthy experiences of that, the less those triggers start to affect us and impact us. And so, for example, one of the triggers for my shame, well, actually for some of my sexual addiction stuff and my shame in it, were certain seeing people in relationships. When I got into recovery, I was single, And it was hard for me to see other people in relationships, or even to watch like TV shows where it showed a romantic interest in there. It started getting me thinking about how lonely I was, how ashamed I was that I felt like I wasn't enough for somebody else. And it would be a trigger for me to want to go and soothe myself by acting out. But as I became aware of that, as I noticed that, as I started to organize those things, one day I noticed, I'm like, oh, like I'm not bothered by that anymore. Or it really doesn't get to me. Or I'll find myself going, man, you know what? Whenever people would bring feedback to me about my performance, it used to totally spin me out and I would go and do this. But I just had a great conversation with somebody where they gave me some feedback and I actually received it. And I feel, it's like, oh, it feels like I'm developing some resilience to the triggers in my life. You know, recovery doesn't eliminate the triggers. It actually helps us to live and endure triggers when they happen. And it also gives us wisdom on how to not put ourselves in places that are going to be ridiculously triggering for us. And so that's another part of it. We start to develop resilience, and part of that developing resilience is forgiving ourselves, forgiving those who hurt us, and making amends as well. And there's a lot in that sentence that we just don't have time to break down, but maybe we can break it down on a later episode. And so we engage in this process of healing, of awareness and organization and developing tools so that we can start to walk in increasing resilience and confidence in ourselves. And that leads us to the next part of helping. See, the goal of my recovery is not just that I am in a more stable place. It's not just that I am starting to experience freedom. It's not just that I'm starting to see behaviors fade from my life that are no longer helpful for me. It's that I'm helping others start to lean into that same process with me. The 12-step process of recovery ends. Step 12, it says, having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we seek to take this message to others and practice these principles in all of our affairs. The goal of recovery is to give back out of what we've been given. And that's a really, really cool experience because nothing has made me more grateful for what God has done in my life than to watch God use me to encourage somebody else. Never in a million years before jumping into recovery did I think that God would use my weaknesses to help impact others. Certainly, I didn't think He would use the deepest part of my shame to do so. But now one of my favorite things to do is to use the parts of my story that I thought I'd never talk about to help other people find hope. And like evidence of a life that is changed is a life that is now outward focused of helping others change too. And it's a really, really cool thing to experience that. And you may be listening to that today and thinking through this process and thinking, Andy, that's awesome, but that'll never be me. I just want to tell you, it absolutely can be. I know it may feel like a million miles away, and it may feel like you've got no hope of finding freedom. But let me just tell you that even though it may not happen overnight, even though it may happen on a timetable that is longer than you would want, even though it may involve us looking at things that we don't want to look at and entering into some messiness that is hard, the process of recovery is worth it because it leads us closer to Jesus. And when we can let Jesus into the weakest places of our hearts, He loves to go to those places and be our strength. 2 Corinthians 12:9, it tells us that it's actually in our weaknesses that Christ's strength is made perfect. He tells us his grace is enough for you, for he delights in making our weaknesses a place where his strength shines through. And could it be the case that he's not lying to us there? If you're in a place where maybe this is interesting to you and you're wanting to lean in a little bit more, we want to encourage you. You're not alone in this process. And there's a community of people where you belong and healing is possible. Every Friday night at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers at 7 p.m., we have Celebrate Recovery. And we would love for you to come and visit, take part in it, and just dip your toe into the process. See what God has for you. I promise you that if God can change my life and the life of hundreds of my friends, he can change you too. But we're so glad that you're here with us today. Thanks for taking the time to listen and be here. We love you, and we'll see you next time.